My wife posted, single until further notice, accepting applications, while we were married. What I did next shocked everyone. I discovered this charming announcement while scrolling through Instagram during my lunch break at the office, complete with her wedding ring clearly visible in the photo she'd chosen to accompany this declaration of availability. 3 years of marriage, and this was how I found out my wife Jenna was ready to explore her options. I'm Tyler, 29, work as a data analyst here in Phoenix, and I just spent my morning reviewing quarterly reports when my phone lit up with notifications about my wife's new relationship status. We lived in our shared townhouse in Ahwatukee, had joint bank accounts, shared a Netflix password, and apparently I was the only one who thought we were actually married. The pottery class she'd mentioned attending that evening suddenly took on new meaning as I stared at her post, which already had 17 comments from various men expressing their interest in submitting applications. I took a screenshot, saved it to my phone, and typed a simple response that would change everything: "Good luck with the search." Then I did something that would later be described by her family as cruel and calculated. I immediately updated my own relationship status to happily divorced and tagged her in it. The notification probably hit her phone just as she was centering clay on her potter's wheel, learning about balance and mindfulness from whatever spiritual guru was teaching that week's class. By the time Jenna returned from her pottery session 3 hours later, she found me calmly folding her clothes into boxes I'd picked up from U-Haul, having already called a locksmith to change our front door locks and started divorce proceedings through one of those online legal services that promise quick turnarounds for uncontested cases. "Tyler, what the hell are you doing?" she asked, standing in our living room doorway with clay still under her fingernails and that bewildered expression people get when their consequences arrive faster than expected. "Helping you with your transition to single life," I replied, continuing to pack her extensive collection of self-help books about finding your authentic self and breaking free from limiting relationships. "You seemed pretty definitive about your status change, so I figured I'd make the logistics easier for both of us." Her phone had been buzzing constantly during her drive home, and I could see the panic in her eyes as she realized her little announcement had gotten more attention than she'd bargained for, including responses from my coworkers, her family members, and apparently half of Phoenix's dating scene. Within an hour of my response going live, her sister Bailey was leaving voicemails demanding explanations about my public humiliation of Jenna, while her mother Sharon was texting me paragraphs about how marriage requires forgiveness and communication, not petty social media warfare that embarrasses the entire family. The real story behind Jenna's sudden interest in pottery and spiritual growth came from an unexpected source the next morning when my colleague Alex pulled me aside during our coffee break with information that made everything click into place. "Dude, I didn't want to say anything before, but I've been seeing your wife at that upscale yoga studio downtown for the past 3 months, he said, looking uncomfortable but determined to share what he knew. "She's been taking private sessions with this instructor named Caleb, and I gotta tell you, it didn't look like they were just working on downward dog poses." Alex had been attending group classes at the same studio and had noticed Jenna's BMW parked there every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, always during the time slot reserved for Caleb's exclusive one-on-one sessions that cost $120 per hour according to their website. I spent my lunch break conducting what I'd later describe as forensic social media analysis, diving deep into Caleb's Instagram account where I found 3 months of constant interaction with Jenna's posts, including comments like, "Your flexibility is truly inspiring," and "Can't wait to help you find your perfect balance," accompanied by yoga pose emojis and flame symbols that seemed far too intimate for a professional instructor-student relationship. The timeline was absolutely damning when I cross-referenced it with our bank statements and Jenna's sudden personality changes that I'd attributed to her new interest in wellness and self-discovery. Her first private session with Caleb occurred exactly 2 weeks after she'd started complaining that our marriage lacked spiritual connection and that I was too grounded in material concerns to understand her journey toward enlightenment. Every Tuesday and Thursday for 12 weeks, she'd been paying Caleb $120 for private sessions while simultaneously lecturing me about our need to budget more carefully and suggesting we cancel our streaming services to save money. The total came to $2,880 of my income funding her emotional affair with a guy who looked like he'd stepped out of a wellness retreat brochure, complete with man bun, tribal tattoos, and a bio describing himself as a spiritual guide helping souls reconnect with their authentic desires. His most recent post featured a quote about releasing toxic attachments that no longer serve your highest good, with a sunset background that Jenna had liked within minutes of him posting it. I realized that every conversation about her need for personal growth and space to explore her spiritual side had been carefully orchestrated preparation for what she'd assumed would be a gradual transition away from our marriage and toward whatever fantasy life Caleb was selling at $120 per session. The pottery class she'd mentioned was real, but it was happening at the same community center where Caleb taught evening meditation workshops, giving her the perfect cover story for her twice-weekly disappearances that I'd naively supported as healthy personal development. 2 days after my Instagram response went viral in our social circle, Jenna arrived at my office building with what can only be described as a full intervention squad, determined to stage what her sister Bailey had apparently convinced everyone was a necessary mental health crisis response to my erratic and vindictive behavior. The group included Bailey herself, Jenna's mother Sharon, her best friend Chloe, who'd driven down from Flagstaff specifically for this confrontation, and most surprisingly, my own mother Linda, who'd been completely manipulated into believing that I was having some kind of psychological breakdown that required immediate family intervention. "Tyler, honey, we're all very concerned about how you're handling the situation," my mother said as they cornered me in the lobby of my building, her voice carrying that tone she'd used when I was 12 and had thrown a tantrum about something I couldn't even remember now. "Jenna explained that you've been under tremendous stress at work, and she's worried that you're not thinking clearly about the consequences of your actions." I suggested we move this conversation to the coffee shop across the street rather than continue providing entertainment for my coworkers who were pretending not to watch through the glass doors, and during that 20-minute walk, I listened to Jenna's carefully crafted narrative about how my controlling tendencies had been escalating for months, how I'd been monitoring her social media activity, questioning her friendships, and making her feel trapped in a marriage where she couldn't express her authentic self without facing my passive-aggressive retaliation. According to the story she'd fed everyone, my Instagram response wasn't the action of a husband who discovered his wife was publicly advertising her availability while still wearing her wedding ring, but rather the calculated move of an emotionally abusive man who couldn't handle his wife's growing independence and spiritual awakening. "I never meant for things to go this far," Jenna said once we'd settled into a corner booth at the coffee shop, tears streaming down her face in what I recognized as her practiced performance for gaining sympathy from audiences who didn't know her as well as I did. "I was just feeling lost and disconnected, and I made a mistake posting that without thinking about how it would affect you, but your response was so cruel and public that now everyone thinks our marriage is some kind of joke." The intervention continued for almost an hour, with each family member taking turns explaining why I needed to delete my social media posts, apologize publicly for embarrassing Jenna, and commit to couples counseling to work through what they'd been convinced were my deep-seated control issues that had driven my wife to seek attention elsewhere. I recorded the entire conversation on my phone, starting from the moment we sat down, because something about the coordinated nature of their approach felt rehearsed and I wanted documentation of whatever was about to unfold. The breakthrough moment came when Jenna, apparently forgetting that she was supposed to be the victim in this scenario, broke down completely and sobbed, "Caleb thinks I'm toxic now because of your petty comment, and he says he can't continue working with someone who creates this much drama in his life, and I deserve to feel desired by someone who appreciates my spiritual journey instead of trying to keep me small and dependent." The silence that followed her confession was absolutely deafening as everyone at the table processed what she just admitted, that there was indeed another man involved, that her spiritual journey included feeling desired by her yoga instructor, and that my response had apparently interfered with whatever relationship she'd been building with Caleb behind our marriage. Bailey's face went from supportive sister to confused interrogator as she asked, "Wait, who is Caleb, and what does he have to do with your marriage problems?" While my mother stared at Jenna with the dawning realization that she'd been manipulated into participating in something much more complicated than a concerned family intervention for her son's supposed mental health crisis. The real entertainment began 3 weeks later when Jenna and Caleb decided to go completely public with their relationship, apparently convinced that my quick divorce filing was just a bluff designed to scare her back into compliance with our boring, spiritually unfulfilling marriage. They started attending couples wellness events around Phoenix, posting Instagram stories from meditation retreats in Sedona, and sharing content about authentic connections and breaking free from toxic relationships that no longer serve your highest purpose. I watched this unfold from the comfortable distance of my newly peaceful townhouse, where I could actually watch Netflix without someone critiquing my choice of entertainment as mindless consumption that distracts from inner growth. Their social media presence became increasingly elaborate and philosophical, with Caleb posting lengthy captions about supporting your partner's journey toward enlightenment, while Jenna shared quotes about choosing love over fear and honoring your truth even when others try to shame you for your authenticity. The weekend retreat in Sedona turned into a complete disaster that I learned about through a chain of mutual friends who'd heard the story from other retreat participants. During a group therapy session designed for couples to share their relationship challenges in a supportive environment, Jenna apparently stood up and delivered a 20-minute monologue about escaping her previous marriage to a man who'd financially abused her by expecting her to contribute to household expenses instead of supporting her spiritual development. She described me as someone who'd monitored her spending, questioned her need for expensive wellness treatments, and tried to control her social media presence because he was threatened by her growing independence and connection to her authentic self. The other participants listened politely until she mentioned that she was still technically married to this abusive ex-husband, at which point several people started asking uncomfortable questions about the timeline of her relationship with Caleb and whether she'd been honest about her marital status when they first started working together. Caleb's discomfort became visible when an older woman in the group pointed out that Jenna's story contained several contradictions, particularly her claim that her ex-husband had been financially controlling while simultaneously admitting that he'd paid for all their shared expenses, including her yoga sessions and spiritual retreats. So he was abusive because he supported your interests, or because he questioned the cost? The woman asked with the kind of direct clarity that comes from years of experience dealing with people who bend reality to fit their narratives. The retreat facilitator tried to redirect the conversation, but Jenna had already revealed too much about the actual dynamics of our marriage, including her expectation that I should fund her journey of self-discovery without asking questions about where the money was going or whether her newfound spirituality included maintaining basic responsibilities as a married adult. By Sunday evening, I received a Facebook message from Caleb himself, apologizing for what he described as being misled about my character and Jenna's situation, explaining that she'd told everyone at the yoga studio that she was divorced and escaping an abusive ex-husband who was stalking her through social media. He genuinely believed he was helping a survivor rebuild her life, not facilitating an affair with a married woman who was using spiritual growth as justification for cheating on her husband while spending his money on private sessions with other men. I want you to know that I never would have gotten involved if I'd known the truth about your marriage, he wrote. Jenna painted a very different picture of your relationship, and I realize now that I was being used as much as you were. The message included screenshots of some of Jenna's more creative lies, including her claim that I'd threatened to hurt myself if she ever left me, that I'd been secretly recording her conversations, and that I'd isolated her from friends and family who might help her escape our toxic dynamic. After Caleb ended their relationship and made it clear that he wanted nothing more to do with her fabricated drama, Jenna launched what can only be described as a full-scale social media warfare campaign designed to salvage her reputation by completely destroying mine. She created a TikTok account called Healing from Narcissistic Marriage, and began posting daily videos about my alleged emotional abuse, manipulation tactics, and financial control that painted me as a calculating sociopath who'd systematically isolated her from her spiritual growth and authentic self-expression. Her content strategy was impressively comprehensive, covering everything from how to recognize financial abuse in marriage, where she described my expectation that she contribute to household expenses as controlling behavior, to gaslighting red flags, where she claimed I'd made her question her own reality by asking for receipts when she spent money on unexplained wellness treatments. The videos quickly gained traction among audiences who love stories about women escaping toxic relationships, and her comment sections filled with supporters encouraging her to stay strong and expose his true nature, while sharing their own experiences with manipulative partners. She organized what she called a truth-telling intervention through a group chat that included distant relatives, college friends who hadn't spoken to either of us in years, and anyone else she could recruit to participate in what was essentially a coordinated character assassination campaign. The group chat messages, which I received screenshots of from my cousin who'd been added to the conversation, painted me as someone who'd used my stable income and logical approach to problem-solving as weapons to keep Jenna dependent and submissive throughout our marriage. According to her narrative, I'd deliberately chosen a wife who made less money so I could control her through financial dependency, monitored her social media to prevent her from connecting with supportive communities, and sabotaged her attempts at personal growth by questioning the legitimacy of expensive spiritual practices that threatened my dominance in our relationship. She claimed that my immediate response to her Instagram post proved I'd been planning to humiliate her publicly the moment she showed any sign of independence, and that my quick action on divorce proceedings demonstrated the calculated cruelty of someone who'd never actually loved her but had simply been using her as a trophy wife to enhance my image as a successful professional. The group chat participants were encouraged to share their own observations about my controlling behavior, and several people contributed stories that were either completely fabricated or based on misinterpretations of normal interactions they'd witnessed during family gatherings or social events. Her sister Bailey wrote a lengthy message about how I'd always seemed too calm and collected during arguments, which she now realized was evidence of my manipulative personality rather than simply being someone who didn't enjoy dramatic confrontations. I decided to respond to this campaign with the same strategic approach I used for data analysis at work, methodically gathering evidence and presenting facts rather than engaging in emotional appeals or personal attacks. I shared time-stamped screenshots of Caleb's apology message where he admitted being misled about our marriage status, bank records showing the thousands of dollars I'd spent supporting Jenna's spiritual journey including her private yoga sessions, and documentation of her lies about our relationship status that proved she'd been maintaining dating profiles while married. The revelation that completely destroyed Jenna's credibility came from our mutual friend Grace, who'd been following the TikTok drama with growing suspicion about the timeline inconsistencies in Jenna's stories. Grace had discovered Jenna's active Bumble profile from 2 months before our separation, complete with photos taken in our shared home and a bio describing herself as recently single and ready to explore connections with spiritually aligned partners. The dating profile included details about her yoga practice, meditation interests, and desire to find someone who understands the importance of personal growth and freedom, all posted while she was still sleeping in our shared bed and using my income to pay for her sessions with Caleb. When Grace shared screenshots of the dating profile in response to one of Jenna's TikTok videos about my alleged emotional abuse, the comments section turned against Jenna completely as viewers realized they'd been manipulated by someone who'd been actively cheating on her husband while claiming to be the victim of his controlling behavior. Desperate to salvage what remained of her crumbling narrative and facing divorce proceedings that would leave her without the comfortable lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to, Jenna and her mother Sharon decided to escalate their campaign by targeting my professional reputation with accusations that could have destroyed my career if my company hadn't been staffed by competent people who understood the difference between legitimate concerns and personal vendettas. They arrived at my tech company's downtown Phoenix office on a Wednesday morning, demanding to speak with human resources about what they described as my unstable mental state and potential danger to female colleagues, claiming that my history of emotional abuse toward women made me a liability that required immediate intervention. Sharon had apparently coached Jenna on how to present their concerns in language that would trigger corporate safety protocols, emphasizing buzzwords like workplace violence potential and psychological evaluation, while suggesting that the company needed to implement protective measures for female employees who might be at risk from my documented pattern of retaliatory behavior against women who challenge his control. The meeting with HR lasted exactly 15 minutes before my company's security director was called in to assess what had quickly become obvious as an attempt at career sabotage rather than legitimate safety concerns. When asked to provide specific examples of threatening behavior or documentation of concerning incidents, both women became agitated and started contradicting their own timeline of events, with Jenna claiming I'd made threatening statements that Sharon insisted had happened on different dates with different witnesses present. The security director, a former police investigator named Marcus who'd handled actual workplace violence cases, recognized the signs of fabricated claims immediately and began asking the kind of detailed questions that people with genuine concerns can answer but those with manufactured grievances cannot. "Can you describe the specific threatening language he used?" Marcus asked, taking notes while Jenna stammered through increasingly vague accusations about my intimidating presence and subtle threats that she couldn't actually quote or provide context for. "Were there witnesses to these incidents, and have you filed police reports about behavior you consider threatening?" The questions exposed the complete lack of substance behind their accusations, and when Marcus pointed out that showing up at someone's workplace to make unsubstantiated claims about their mental health could itself be considered harassment, both women became defensive and started demanding to speak with someone in authority who would take their concerns more seriously. My supervisor, who'd worked with me for 3 years and had witnessed my calm, professional demeanor through multiple high-stress projects and deadline pressures, provided character testimony that contradicted everything Jenna and Sharon were claiming about my supposed instability and threatening behavior. "Tyler is one of our most reliable analysts," she told Marcus and the HR representative. "He handles pressure well, works collaboratively with all team members regardless of gender, and has never shown any signs of the aggressive or unstable behavior these women are describing." The meeting concluded with Marcus issuing a formal cease and desist order that banned both Jenna and Sharon from company property, while HR documented the incident as attempted career sabotage that would be reported to legal authorities if they made any further contact with my workplace. The irony wasn't lost on me that Jenna's final desperate attempt to prove I was emotionally unstable and controlling had been carried out through behavior that was actually unstable and controlling, involving harassment, fabricated accusations, and attempts to destroy my livelihood because I'd refused to continue funding her fantasy lifestyle after she'd publicly announced her availability for other relationships. 6 months after Jenna's Instagram declaration that changed everything, I was sitting in a quiet restaurant in Scottsdale with Maya, a veterinarian I'd met through a hiking group, discussing our plans for a weekend camping trip that we'd split the costs for equally without any dramatic negotiations or accusations of financial abuse. Maya represented everything I'd thought I wanted in a partnership but had never actually experienced with Jenna, someone who appreciated stability rather than seeing it as boring, who contributed to our shared experiences rather than expecting to be entertained at my expense, and who treated our relationship as a collaboration rather than a financial arrangement disguised as romance. "I still can't believe she tried to get you fired," Maya said, shaking her head as I finished telling her about Jenna and Sharon's disastrous visit to my office. "What kind of person thinks that's an appropriate way to handle a divorce?" The kind of person who'd spent 3 years treating marriage like a subscription service that should continue providing benefits regardless of her behavior, I realized, but I'd learned that dwelling on Jenna's psychological motivations was less productive than simply appreciating the contrast with someone who actually wanted to build something together rather than extract resources from a willing provider. Meanwhile, Jenna's TikTok following had collapsed entirely after viewers realized her contradictory stories were completely fabricated, and her comment sections had transformed from supportive communities into collections of people calling out her lies and sharing their own experiences with manipulative partners who played victim when held accountable for their actions. She deleted most of her content and eventually abandoned the account entirely when several followers started posting side-by-side comparisons of her claims with the evidence I'd shared, creating a timeline that made it impossible to maintain her narrative about being the wronged party in our divorce. The financial reality of single life had hit her exactly as hard as anyone with basic math skills could have predicted, and she'd been forced to move back in with Sharon after discovering that her $38,000 salary couldn't support the lifestyle that my income had been funding throughout our marriage. Her BMW had been repossessed when she couldn't make payments without my contribution to her car note, and her social media presence had shifted from spiritual growth content to increasingly desperate posts about the challenges of starting over and rebuilding after toxic relationships. The divorce had finalized with exactly the outcome that any objective observer would have expected, I kept the townhouse that I'd been paying for, along with my retirement accounts and the savings that had accumulated from my income, while Jenna received her personal belongings and nothing else after the recorded conversations where she'd admitted to her affair had eliminated any possibility of alimony claims. Her family's attitude toward me had undergone a complete transformation once they'd realized the extent of her lies and manipulation, with Bailey actually apologizing for participating in the intervention and my mother expressing embarrassment about being recruited for Jenna's campaign against my character. The lesson I'd learned wasn't about the dangers of marriage or the untrustworthiness of women, but about the importance of recognizing when someone sees you as a resource rather than a partner, and the difference between supporting someone's growth and enabling their exploitation of your generosity. Maya and I had been together for 4 months, and the ease of our relationship, built on mutual respect, shared expenses, and genuine affection rather than financial dependency disguised as love, had shown me what I'd been missing during those 3 years of funding someone else's fantasy while being treated like an emotional placeholder until something better came along.